5.10, last lesson of this unit and of this semester. We talked about what is the most revolutionary part of the Industrial Revolution, and you guys had some great ideas about the steam engine, or transportation, or other energy sources, or social mobility. And I think all of you are right, and I love the way that you're thinking. And I hope that you feel that you understand this unit, and you really see how this unit has made our modern lives possible, including leisure time. It's almost finals. I know you're all looking forward to a few weeks of leisure time. This is now possible during the Industrial Revolution. Thanks to unions, and rather than agricultural jobs where you work every single day of the year, factories work 5 days a week or 5.5 days a week. And the unions made sure of that, making sure that people weren't working hours that were too long or giving the workers rights. So now the workers have a weekend. They have 2 days off, which means they have time that they need to fill. In addition to that, in an industrialized society, it's not based, your pay is not based on trade. I'll pay you chickens and you pay me in zucchini. But instead, it's based on cash, on capital. So people now have time and they have the cash money to spend. So some of the things that become popular to culture in the 1800s are going to dances, going to group dances, and there are sort of known dances like the waltz or the foxtrot or things like that. People go to dances and socialize. When they're at the dances, they might have a drink. So we have a greater culture of drinking alcoholic beverages out or socializing. Professional sports really get their start in this era in the late 1800s. This is James Naismith, the inventor of modern basketball. When he worked at the YMCA, it was a rainy day one time, and the boys were antsy, and so he creates a game. He takes an old peach basket and a ball, and he nails up the basket on the wall. We have sports. This is when we start to see professional baseball and professional football get their very early start. So you guys go to dances, you guys play sports, I know you guys watch movies. This is a magic lantern store, which is an early form of a movie. It's not a moving picture, but people would travel from town to town with this apparatus, first with candlelight and then with electricity, and they would tell these wonderful stories with images connected. Sometimes those images would move sort of like a puppet show would, or paper dolls. But this is an early form of going to the movies. People traveled. You guys go on lots of great trips when you're on breaks. People are now able to travel. One, we have the transportation, we have the means to get to other places, and two, they have the wealth. And it's important that people put these stickers on their suitcases because when they come home, their neighbors see, oh, they went to that place. Oh, they're very fancy. They're very high class. Another thing that I am very grateful for is the advent of modern medicine. All of these problems we've talked about lots of good things and lots of bad things in the Industrial Revolution. Problems like cholera, my personal favorite. Cholera was such a problem, and one important breakthrough was made in 1854 by Dr. John Snow. He was a doctor in London, and in 1854 there was a major outbreak of cholera. And Dr. Snow really was just fascinated. Why did this happen? Why did it happen in the neighborhood it happened? He was able to narrow it down to a single water pump on Broad Street in London. It's important enough that it's still there today. And what this proves is that illness was related to specific causes. Before this, most people believed that illness was caused by miasma, a sort of bad, negative air that if it just passed through, you might happen to get sick. It's almost very random. But with this, Dr. John Snow is confirming that there is a specific cause for a specific illness. And this is how he figures it out. He takes a map of London and he marks every single case of cholera. So every red dot is where a cholera victim lived. Every blue dot was a water fountain or a water pump. Once he plotted this, he noticed that the majority of patients or victims lived around and used the Broad Street water pump. Those who lived on the outskirts had been in that neighborhood for some reason. So he realizes that there was a specific cause for that cholera. We will eventually call it germ theory. This is an important innovation. Taking off from there is Louis Pasteur. He wants to know also, are there specific causes? And that's what he does with his broth experiments. And does the mold just grow, or is there a way to stop it or prevent it? It's just a continuation of germ theory. That by leaving something out and just random air, both things would get gross. It wasn't a random happening. He realizes, okay, this is not just random. There are specific causes for problems. So then what do we do next? How do we prevent those problems from happening? And that's what becomes known as pasteurization, heating up these liquids to a specific temperature to kill the bacteria. So that happens with your milk, with your orange juice, all sorts of other foods to make sure they are safe for you. So this really leads into a new era of medical research, realizing there are specific causes and coming up with specific solutions. Before this, if you had a headache, you would hope you bought the right tonic, or hope that if you got a couple leeches, it would fix you. But really, this is starting to be medicine as we know it. Another important element of that is Florence Nightingale. Florence Nightingale was an upper-class British woman, and in 1854, the Crimean War was raging on near the Ottoman Empire. Britain was fighting the Ottoman Empire, and reports were coming home of so many soldiers that were dying, not necessarily in battle, but in the field hospitals. And Nightingale's heart was touched by this, so she travels to the Crimea, and she starts working in these hospitals. She doesn't have any medical training. She's not a doctor, and many of the doctors in the hospitals were a bit confused and upset by her presence there. But first she starts off just sort of being a comfort to the soldiers, helping them write letters, visiting with them when they were awake in the middle of the night. And she was known as the Lady of the Lamp because she would walk through the hospital at night. But then she realized that the hospitals were really filthy, so she starts making sure they stay clean, that the bed sheets are changed, that the orderlies and the doctors wash their hands and wash their utensils for surgery. Even though she may have been a nuisance, she made a difference because the men in her ward, didn't die as frequently. So doctors start to pay attention. Something that she is doing is making a difference, that maybe there are specific causes for why these men are dying. This really is the beginning of modern nursing as we know it today. And if you've ever been sick or in the hospital or visited someone in the hospital, you know that nurses are essential to getting better and to patient healing. Florence Nightingale is also important because she demonstrates this sort of new era of feminism, that women are capable, that they deserve rights. We also have the example of Marie Curie, the famous scientist originally from Poland, who came to France and worked with her husband Pierre on radium and polonium. She was awarded 2 Nobel Prizes. To be awarded 1 is already impressive enough, but for a woman with what is thought of as small brain to be awarded a Nobel Prize, that's saying women are capable. They are very, very capable. They are just as capable as men. Another important person is Emmeline Pankhurst. She was a famous British suffragette, a woman who was fighting for voting rights. She would give impassioned speeches. She would get violent to prove her point, to get attention for this. She would attack members of parliament. She was put in jail many times. She went on hunger strikes to draw attention that this is something that we demand. Women must have votes. Changing gears just a little bit, we're going to talk about Charles Darwin. This is rewinding a little bit in time, but it's really important for this unit. Darwin is a young man in the 1820s, loved nature, loved biology, loved being out in nature, but his father was forcing him to be a pastor, and he was having a bit of a quarter-life crisis. Wasn't ready to be a pastor yet, and the perfect opportunity came up. His friend offered him a spot on the HMS Beagle, a sailboat that would be going around the world. And Darwin took him up on his offer and realized he could see the world and, hold off until he had to become a pastor. They take this crazy trip down around South America to the Galapagos Islands, to New Zealand and Australia and South Africa. And this takes them a couple years. And in that time, Charles Darwin sees a whole range of animals and wildlife that he had never seen before, that were so different than anything he had ever imagined. Simultaneously, while Darwin is on this trip, he is reading the work of Thomas Malthus, a British economist. Malthus wrote about population and its relation to resources. That if there are a lack of resources, that oftentimes people start dying. We've seen this before with the Little Ice Age or with French Revolution and famines. But Darwin is looking at the natural world, looking at animals and these strange traits that they have in other places of the world, while he's reading Malthus. So Darwin is thinking about changes to animals, lack of resources, and wondering what had happened in these other parts of the world to create such interesting and different animals. He is so passionate about this that he does not become a pastor. He becomes a scientist, and his first major book is On the Origin of Species. The main idea from this is natural selection, that the natural world, when resources are changed, that the natural world, the animals and the plants, will change to adapt, and that nature will select the best option. Then, in 1871, he publishes The Descent of Man, and this causes him a bit of conflict because he still is a man of faith. The main idea here is that there is common descent, that man perhaps has descended from someone else. We have almost evolved from another form due to those resources and how population changes. So again, still referring back to Malthus, but now this is really evolution. And Darwin, in many ways, was conflicted, in the same way that there is conflict today about evolution. It is possible to be a Christian and believe in evolution, but you just have to figure out some questions. If evolution exists, if nature and mankind are improving, does it mean that in the Bible it says we are created in the image of God, that creation was flawed? Was it wrong to begin with? Was it not good enough? Does it mean that Darwin didn't believe God? No. But from his view of nature and from what he witnessed and what he saw and reasoned, it caused him to question some things. Does evolution mean that if we are in a process of getting better, that we can become perfect? If that's the case, why do we need God? And also, it means that things are getting better and better and more ordered, rather than the opposite, rather than becoming more chaotic. And if you look at nature sometimes, often, let's say if you had a garden and you didn't prune any of the trees, you didn't mow the lawn, you just left it for a year, it would become overgrown and chaotic. So in many ways, we witness order leading to chaos and not the other way around. This will lead to social Darwinism, taking these very biological concepts and applying them to mankind as a whole. The famous phrase we think of with evolution is the survival of the fittest, but it really only specifically refers to social Darwinism. That the humans that survive, the men and women that survive, are the best examples of the species, the most fit. So then this leads to what's known as eugenics. That if it is possible that the fittest survive, then why don't we only encourage the fittest? Why don't we sort of scientifically, almost using animal husbandry but for people, why don't we create the best humans that we can create? So here's an example of that. In Brazil, there were many, many Africans who were brought over during the Atlantic slave trade. It was considered to be desirable to have lighter skin. So we can see here is a process arguing for racial superiority. If you breed or you mate someone with dark skin with someone with light skin, it gets lighter. And then you can breed into someone what is desirable. And in that case, it is desired to be lighter skinned. Eugenics is a way to sort of explain away racism. And if you have a list of what you do desire, it means there's a list of what you don't desire. So maybe during the Industrial Revolution, that could include the poor. Why are they getting sick and dying? They're weak. If they were a better species or a better example of our species, they'd work harder and make more money and live in a better house. Someone who is different, we always fear someone who is different. But if you don't like the color of someone else, then figure out a way. How can we limit what is undesirable? Or mental illness. Now, mental illness could mean schizophrenia, bipolar, could be mild depression. But that's their genes. That's who they are. That will be reproduced. You don't want to reproduce that. Or physical disabilities. Again, that could be total paraplegia, that could be a slight limp. But if it's not perfect, we don't want to replicate it. So we should just eliminate it. And this is exactly what will lead to, in the 20th century, the mindset of the Nazis. That it's okay to be racist because it's just science. We're just using the scientific method. We're just using everything that we've learned. And in the 1800s, we won't go as far as genocide, but forced abortion and sterilization were used. How do we limit what we don't want, what we are afraid of? And this is a very sad and dangerous episode in human history because it reminds us of these threads of history. This semester we've talked about the pursuit of freedom and how mankind has pursued different types of freedom. These threads of history are going to knit together first and second semester. In this semester, we have seen examples of mankind thinking they are not evil. No, humans are good. We have good human nature. We have seen examples of man coming up with their truth and relying on themselves, and that science is superior. There is evidence for all of this, and that human progress, it's amazing. Look at everything we've accomplished. But the problem is that without faith, without God, none of it matters and will always fail. It will always lead to destruction. So many of the things that we've learned this semester, we will see in second semester how they cause problems. Because without a Christian worldview, without an understanding of God's power, then what's the purpose? Mankind thinks they're great, and mankind will always fail.